A scorching, ordinary Tuesday at a desert rest stop was shattered when a terrified little girl stumbled out of the brush, whispering to us hardened bikers that her daddy was making her mommy an angel. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the cracked asphalt of the rest stop. It was the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer over the blacktop, the kind that makes your leather vest feel like a furnace and the chrome on your bike hot enough to brand cattle. We were just killing time, 100 miles from anywhere that mattered. There were 5 of us, me, Rhino, Preacher, Ace, and a prospect we called New Blood. We're the Serpent's Hand MC, not the kind you see on TV, all drama and backstabbing. We're mostly just old vets who found more family on 2 wheels than we ever did on 2 feet. We were sprawled around a graffiti-covered picnic table, nursing lukewarm water bottles and swapping lies. Rhino, a man whose neck is thicker than my thigh, was polishing a spot on his gas tank for the 10th time. Preacher was quoting something from a book I'd never read, and Ace was trying to teach New Blood how to look intimidating without actually saying anything. It was a Tuesday. A boring, sweltering, forgettable Tuesday. Or at least it was supposed to be. The first thing I noticed was the movement, a flicker of motion at the edge of the scrubland that bordered the highway. I figured it was a coyote or a jackrabbit, something flushed out by the heat. But it wasn't. The flicker became a shape, small and frantic, stumbling out of the thorny brush and onto the service road that led to the rest stop. It was a kid, a little girl, running with the kind of desperate, clumsy gait that means pure terror is the only thing keeping you upright. Instantly, the lazy atmosphere evaporated. The laughter died in our throats. Rhino stopped polishing and stood up, his massive frame casting a long, sharp shadow. Ace and New Blood were on their feet, their hands instinctively moving to their belts. We don't get a lot of surprises out here, and the ones we do get are rarely good. She was maybe 7 or 8 years old, a little black girl with her hair in 2 pigtails, one of which had come undone, letting a spray of beaded braids fly wildly as she ran. Her dress, once probably a cheerful yellow, was torn at the hem and smeared with dirt and something dark that looked terrifyingly like dried blood. She was barefoot, and I could see even from a distance that the soles of her feet were raw and bleeding, leaving faint, tragic prints on the dusty pavement. But it was her face that stopped my heart. Her eyes were huge, wide with a horror that no child should ever know. They weren't just scared eyes. They were hollowed out, like she'd seen the end of the world and was the only one left to talk about it. She wasn't running to the main building with its vending machines and restrooms. She wasn't running toward the 1 or 2 cars parked in the lot. She was running straight at us, at 5 of the meanest-looking men you could ever hope to avoid in a dark alley. She ran right for the mountain of a man that was Rhino, the walking embodiment of every mother's warning. She finally reached us and just collapsed, her small body giving out a few feet from Rhino's steel-toed boots. She didn't make a sound, just fell in a heap of exhausted terror. For a second, nobody moved. We were frozen. We deal with bar fights, rival clubs, crooked cops. We don't deal with this. I was the first to break the spell. "Easy, brothers," I said, my voice low and calm. I knelt down, moving slow like I was approaching a spooked horse. "Hey now, little one, you're okay. You're safe with us." Her breath was coming in ragged, painful sobs that shook her whole body. She tried to push herself up, to scramble away, her eyes darting between our faces, each one probably looking like a nightmare to her. I held up my hands, showing they were empty. "We're not going to hurt you," I said, as gently as I could. "I promise." Preacher was already there with a bottle of water. He knelt beside me, unscrewing the cap. "Here, little sister," he murmured, his voice a soft rumble. "Just a sip. You look like you've run a long way." She flinched when he reached for her, but she was too exhausted to fight. He gently tilted the bottle to her lips, and she drank. She drank like she'd been crawling through a desert, water spilling down her chin and onto the front of her ruined dress. When she was done, she slumped against my arm, her small frame trembling uncontrollably. I could feel the frantic, bird-like flutter of her heart against my leather-clad forearm. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, just letting her breathe. Rhino took off his cut, the heavy leather vest with our colors on the back, and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her whole, a gesture of protection so profound it was almost comical. Finally, the shaking subsided just enough for her to speak. Her voice was a tiny, broken whisper, barely more than a scratch in the silence. "Please," she croaked, her eyes locking onto mine. "Please. You have to help." "Help with what, sweetie?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Who are you running from?" She squeezed her eyes shut, a fresh wave of terror washing over her face. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She took a shuddering breath, trying to force the words out. We all leaned in, the only sound the distant hum of the highway and the girl's ragged breathing. She opened her eyes again, and they were filled with a chilling, absolute certainty. "My daddy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He told me to run. He said he was making my mommy an angel." The world narrowed to those 6 words. The oppressive heat, the distant drone of trucks on the interstate, the smell of dust and old gasoline, it all vanished. There was only the little girl's ragged whisper and the monstrous image it painted in our minds. Making my mommy an angel. It was a child's phrase for an adult's unspeakable act. A cold, heavy silence fell over our group, colder than any winter wind I've ever ridden through. Rhino, who had been kneeling, slowly rose to his full, intimidating height, but the usual menace in his posture was gone, replaced by a kind of rigid stillness, like a granite statue carved in the shape of pure rage. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the picnic table. Preacher closed his eyes and bowed his head, his lips moving in a silent prayer. Ace just stared out at the scrubland she'd run from, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. He had 2 little girls of his own. I could see him picturing their faces. I pushed my own rising fury down. She didn't need our anger right now. She needed us to be calm. "Okay, honey," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I wanted. I cleared my throat and tried again, softer this time. "What's your name?" She looked up at me from under the heavy weight of Rhino's vest, her eyes still swimming with tears. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily. That's a beautiful name," I said, forcing a small smile. "My name is Patch. Can you tell us where you came from, Lily? Where's your mommy now?" Her little body tensed up again. She pointed a trembling finger back the way she came, toward the dense thicket of mesquite and creosote bushes. "In the blue car," she said, her voice hitching. "The blue car that won't wake up. It's hiding in the trees." "The car won't wake up?" Preacher asked gently, his prayer finished. Lily nodded, a fresh tear rolling down her cheek. "Daddy got mad. He was yelling and yelling 'cause the car went to sleep. Then he started yelling at Mommy for sleeping too." She buried her face in her hands, her small shoulders shaking with sobs. She wouldn't wake up. That was it, the last piece of the puzzle I needed, and the one I had been dreading. I pulled out my phone. My hands, usually steady enough to field strip a carbine in the dark, were trembling slightly. "Ace, get your bike to the highway entrance. New Blood, take the service road. Radio us if you see a single headlight or taillight that isn't a cop. Nobody comes in or out of here." They didn't hesitate. They were on their bikes in seconds, the low rumble of their engines a comforting promise of controlled violence. I thumbed the screen and dialed 911. 911, what is your location? The dispatcher's voice was bored, mechanical. "Interstate 10, eastbound, mile marker 142. There's a rest stop," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "We have a child here. She's in trouble." "What is the nature of the emergency, sir?" I took a deep breath, the hot air scorching my lungs. I looked at Lily, curled up against Preacher, her face a mask of misery. I looked at Rhino, standing guard over her, his massive back to us. I could see his shoulders hitched, shuddering. The toughest, meanest, most unshakable man I'd ever known was crying. Silently, but he was crying. The dispatcher's question hung in the air, and for the life of me I couldn't form a coherent sentence. The horror of it was choking me. "Sir? Are you there, sir?" Preacher saw me struggling. He put a hand on my arm and spoke, his voice clear and steady, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside all of us. Ma'am, my name is John. We have found a little girl, maybe 7 years old. Her name is Lily. She's barefoot, bleeding. She says she ran from her father. She says he was hurting her mother." There was a pause, and then the dispatcher's tone sharpened. "Hurting her how, sir?" I finally found my voice. It came out as a strangled rasp. "She said he was making her an angel." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear the frantic clicking of a keyboard. "Okay, sir. We're dispatching State Patrol and a sheriff's deputy to your location. Your ETA is 20 minutes. Can you stay on the line? Is the father nearby? Is the child injured? 20 minutes. In our world, a lifetime." I relayed the information about Lily's feet and the state of her dress. I told them we didn't know where the father was, only that the car was somewhere off the road in the brush. Lily, who had been quiet, seemed to shrink at the mention of her father. Her eyes grew wide again, a fresh wave of panic cresting. "No," she whimpered, grabbing onto Preacher's arm. "He's coming." "It's okay, Lily," Preacher soothed. "The police are coming. You're safe now." "No!" she cried, her voice rising to a frantic shriek that cut right through me. "You don't understand. He told me to run and hide, but he said he'd play a game. He said he would count to 100 and then he would come find me." A new, colder dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't just a man who'd snapped. This was a game to him. A hunt. We all looked at each other, the same terrible realization dawning in our eyes. The cops were 20 minutes out. This monster's game of hide-and-seek had probably started long before that. Lily's next words froze the blood in our veins. She looked right at me, her tear-filled eyes pleading. "He said he had to find me," she whispered, her voice trembling with a terror that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. "He said angels get lonely, and he had to bring me to Mommy so she wouldn't be all alone in the sky." The dispatcher's voice on the phone sounded very far away. Sir, did you hear me? Is the child with you?" I couldn't seem to make my mouth work. The image her words conjured, this man, this monster, hunting his own little girl to make her an angel, was so grotesque it short-circuited my brain. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was hunting. And we were sitting right on the X. "Patch!" Rhino's voice was a low growl that shook me out of my stupor. "Talk to me. What's the plan?" I blinked, forcing myself back to the present. The plan. Right. We were the plan. 20 minutes was an eternity we didn't have. "Ma'am," I said into the phone, my voice hard now, all traces of shock replaced by ice. "Listen to me very carefully. The father is actively hunting the child. He thinks it's a game. He could be anywhere. We need that ETA moved up. You understand me? Now." "Sir, I've already put in the call for an expedited response. All available units are en route. Just stay calm and keep the child safe." "Calm's not on the menu," I grunted and ended the call. No point wasting time talking. It was time for doing. I looked at my brothers. Their faces were grim, set like stone. We didn't need a long discussion. We'd been in tight spots before, a different continent, a different war. But the feeling was the same. The enemy is close, and you are all that stands between them and the innocent. "Preacher, you stay with Lily. Don't let her out of your sight. Get her behind that picnic table. Keep her low." Preacher nodded, scooping the little girl up as if she weighed nothing. He carried her to the concrete table and sat with his back to the open scrubland, making his own body a shield. Lily buried her face in his chest, clutching his leather cut. "Rhino," I said, turning to the biggest man I knew. He was already pulling a heavy, weighted chain from his saddlebag. Not his first choice of weapon, but a devastating one. "You watch the east side, toward the brush she came from. If so much as a leaf rustles, I want to know about it." He gave a single sharp nod and moved to his post, a silent, leather-clad mountain of righteous fury, the chain dangling ominously from his fist. I keyed my radio. "Ace. Status." "All quiet on the interstate, Patch." His voice crackled back. "No sign of a blue car or anyone on foot. It's just us and the asphalt." "New blood?" "Service road is clear. Nothing but heat shimmer." "Copy that. Eyes open. He might already be past you. I pulled my own knife from the sheath on my belt. It was a Ka-Bar, a relic from my grandfather's service that had seen me through my own. The worn leather handle felt familiar and deadly in my palm. We were outgunned by whatever this lunatic might be carrying, but we weren't helpless. We were the serpent's hand, and we protect our own. This little girl was our own now. The seconds stretched into minutes. The only sounds were the buzz of a persistent fly and the frantic beating of my own heart. The sun beat down relentlessly. Sweat trickled down my temples, stinging my eyes. Every shadow seemed to lengthen and twist, taking on a human form. A tumbleweed bouncing across the lot made me flinch, my grip tightening on the knife. This was a new kind of war zone. Not a jungle or a desert, but a sun-bleached purgatory of asphalt and concrete. Preacher was murmuring to Lily, his deep voice a calming anchor in the storm of our tension. I couldn't make out the words, just the gentle, steady cadence. I saw him give her the serpent's hand patch from his own vest, a small, embroidered circle with a coiled snake. "Snakes are good," I heard him whisper to her. "They protect their family. Your family now." My radio crackled again. It was Ace. "Patch, I got something. Not a car. Someone on foot. Way down the shoulder of the highway. Coming this way." My blood ran cold. "Describe him." "Hard to tell from this distance," Ace replied. "Tall, skinny. He's not walking right. Kinda stumbling. Looks like he's got a bag or something." This was it. The countdown was over. "Rhino, you hear that?" Rhino grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes fixed on the distant figure now becoming visible down the highway. My gaze, however, was drawn back to Lily. She had pulled her head up from Preacher's chest. She wasn't looking toward the highway. She was staring, transfixed, at the squat, cinder-block restroom building just 50 feet away from us. Her face had gone completely white, her eyes wide with a recognition that was 1,000 times more terrifying than the approaching man on the road. "Lily, what is it, sweetie?" Preacher asked, following her gaze. We all did. We stared at the faded blue paint of the men's room door, at the peeling graffiti. We saw nothing, but she saw it. A new wave of trembling seized her small body, more violent than before. She lifted a shaking finger and pointed. Her voice was a choked, horrified gasp, a sound that will echo in my head until the day I die. "The game," she sobbed. "His shirt. It was red. Like that." I squinted, my eyes tracing the line of her finger. I had scanned that building a dozen times and seen nothing, but now I saw what she saw. It wasn't on the door itself. It was the handle, the plain, metal door handle. It was smeared with something dark, something viscous and sticky, and from the bottom of it, a single thick droplet of crimson was slowly, lazily, making its way down the length of the metal. It was a fresh smear of blood. He wasn't on the highway. He was already here. My brain barely had time to process the sight of the blood before the restroom door creaked open. It didn't fly open, didn't burst. It moved slowly, deliberately, with a chilling lack of urgency. The man who stepped out wasn't a monster in the way you see in movies. He was just a man. Scrawny, with lank, greasy hair plastered to his forehead, and a cheap, sweat-stained t-shirt that was, as Lily had said, mostly red. His eyes were the only thing that gave him away. They were glassy, vacant, and fixed on Lily with a predatory emptiness that made the hair on my arms stand up. "There you are," he said, his voice raspy and thin. "Daddy found you. See? It's a fun game." He took a step forward, and in his right hand I saw what he'd been carrying. It wasn't a bag. It was a tire iron, dark and heavy, the end of it coated in the same gruesome red as his shirt and the door handle. My radio squawked. "Patch, that guy on the road is just some drifter. He's walking right on by. What's going on?" "He's here, Ace, at the restrooms. Get back here now." But there was no time. The man, Lily's father, was less than 40 feet away. Preacher had already pushed Lily fully behind him, turning to face the threat. Rhino took a step forward, placing himself between the man and Preacher, the heavy chain in his hand swinging in a low, menacing arc. "That's far enough." Rhino's voice was a low rumble, like an earthquake starting deep underground. The man barely seemed to notice him. His focus was entirely on Lily, cowering behind Preacher. You can't hide from Daddy, Lilybug. It's time to go see Mommy. She's waiting for you. He took another shuffling step forward, raising the tire iron slightly. She's so lonely. That was it. That was the moment the world exploded. I didn't think. I just moved. I charged him, knife held low, yelling a wordless roar of pure fury. My only thought was to get between him and that little girl. He turned his dead eyes toward me, a flicker of surprise crossing his face as he realized there was more than one obstacle. He swung the tire iron in a wild, clumsy arc. I dropped and rolled, the heavy iron whistling through the air where my head had been a second before. I came up inside his guard, driving the pommel of my K-bar into his sternum. The air whooshed out of him in a pained grunt. He stumbled back, but his grip on the weapon was fever-strong. Before he could recover, Rhino was on him. It wasn't a fight. It was an avalanche. Rhino's chain wrapped around the man's arm with a sickening crack of bone. The tire iron clattered to the asphalt. The man screamed, a high, thin sound of agony. But Rhino wasn't done. He was a force of nature, a father's protective rage made manifest. He spun the man around, slamming him face first into the cinder-block wall of the restroom. He did it again and again, the sickening thud echoing across the rest stop. I grabbed Rhino's arm. "Rhino, stop! He's down! It's over!" I had to shout to get through to him. He was breathing like a freight train, his face a mask of vengeance. He finally relented, letting the now limp form of Lily's father slump to the ground in a broken heap. Just then, the wail of sirens cut through the air, growing closer. Ace and New Blood roared into the parking lot on their bikes, skidding to a halt. The first state patrol car was right behind them, followed by two more. The world became a blur of uniforms, radios, and official voices. We backed away, forming a protective semicircle around Preacher and Lily, who was still sobbing into his chest. I explained what happened, pointing to the man on the ground and the bloody tire iron. Paramedics arrived, one team working on the father, another coming over to check on Lily. She refused to leave Preacher's arms. One of the deputies, a woman with kind eyes, came over. "We found the car," she said softly, her voice filled with a weary sadness. It's like the little girl said. The mother, she didn't make it." She looked at Lily, her expression hardening. "But because of you guys, this little one did. You did a good thing here today." It didn't feel like a good thing. It felt like we just stared into the abyss. We watched as they loaded the father, alive but broken, into an ambulance. We watched as they put Lily, wrapped in a blanket and finally coaxed from Preacher's arms, into the back of the deputy's patrol car. Before the door closed, she looked at us. Her eyes, still filled with an ocean of sadness, found ours. She reached out her small hand and clutched the serpent's hand patch Preacher had given her. It was a silent thank you, a promise of survival. We stood there long after the last siren had faded into the distance, just 5 bikers covered in dust and road grime, surrounded by the ghosts of what had happened. The sun was finally starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for the day we'd just had. Rhino finally broke the silence. He walked over and picked up his leather cut, the one he had draped over Lily. He held it for a moment, then put it back on. It looked different now. It looked heavier. "Preacher," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You got any words for this?" Preacher looked out at the setting sun. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, steady rumble that seemed to settle the shaking in my own hands. "The wicked spring up like grass, and all the workers of iniquity do flourish," he quoted softly. "It is that they shall be destroyed forever." He looked at each of us, his gaze lingering. Today we weren't the wicked. Today we were the damn gardeners. And with that we picked up our helmets, threw our legs over our bikes, and rode off into the sunset, leaving that cursed patch of asphalt behind. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were riding toward something more than just the horizon. We were riding with the weight of a promise kept, and the ghost of a little girl's whisper to remind us why we ride in the first place.